screen starts glowing, and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hey everyone, welcome to an extra super duper special episode of The Goods, a film podcast. I'm here with Brian, as per usual.
Hi everybody.
And Brian, you just did the first recording session, I don't know what you call it, filming day of your master's project.
That's right. So we're very much in the thick of it. We're going back again tomorrow out to the beach. They encouraged us to stick to weekdays when there'd be fewer people out there, so going back Wednesday and Thursday all day, and that's going to be a big ambitious shoot, but yes, one production day in the can. So check out the Discord. I'll drop some behind the scenes and some stills. It's looking good. We have a lot to do.
Cool.
But I carved out some time to watch a couple movies and talk with you guys.
And you said you guys, because what I have not yet said is that we have a guest today. We have one of our oldest buddies back on the pod, and that is Andrew Milne, known on the Discord as Thrash. Andrew is, of course, a podcaster himself, as well as a sci-fi author who loves space stories.
Indeed he does.
How you doing, Andrew?
Hey, Dan. Hey, Brian. Good to be back. Good to see you both. Thanks for having me back on. And yeah, this is what I've been looking forward to for quite some time. I really like talking space with anyone who is willing to indulge my spacey brain. So yeah, good to be back. And congratulations on getting the first day in the can, Brian. I'm looking forward to seeing the final product.
Oh, thank you. I think you'll like it. It's got some space.
So I understand, yeah. Nice one.
So we hadn't had Andrew on in a while. We thought it might be time to have him back because we always have a good time with him. And he always has interesting insights and brings us to places that we wouldn't otherwise go. I guess I was going to say literally. I mean, we all still just kind of watch the movie where we watch movies, but the settings literally took us places we don't often go.
Yeah, that's always my ambition. Yeah, I try to push the envelope a little bit.
And so we're doing a double header of two movies about traveling to the moon and potentially beyond. One of them from 1929 and one of them 90 years later, 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, precisely 90 years. That was kind of by design.
And they are Lady on the Moon by Fritz Lang. Is it Lang or Long, Brian?
I've heard both. I mean, German pronunciation, I guess, would be long, but lots of people say Fritz Lang. And he moved to America, started making films in America, left Germany to kind of evade the Nazis. And this is a really interesting moment in time that this movie came out.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into that.
I want to talk about Lang. I want to talk about the context of this film for sure. I got a lot of thoughts. And then the second film we're going to be discussing is the 2019 film by James Gray, starring Brad Pitt, entitled Ad Astra. At least that's how I think you'd pronounce it. And I did take Latin, so I think it's Latin, to the stars.
Yeah. So it's sort of derived from the Latin proverb para spera ad astra, which means through hardship to the stars. It's also sometimes rendered as ad astra para spera. So it can kind of cut both ways in terms of what you're emphasizing. So that's sort of what it's alluding to.
Interesting. I was thinking of Titanic. They say, or it's when they're about to have sex in the car in the cargo hold. Jack climbs into the front. He says, "Where to, miss?" And she says, "To the stars."
Nice one.
And so I think we're going to talk about them first, the Lang film, the long film in both meanings of the word.
Very much so.
And then about Ad Astra. So I don't know if I said, I think I did say this. James Gray, who I also have some thoughts about. But let's start by asking Andrew. You didn't really tell us why you picked it. You just gave us two movies. So I have some guesses. But tell us, why did you pick these two movies for us to discuss?
Oh, yeah. So there's sort of a concatenation of reasons. So I think, as you mentioned up front, I do write sci-fi stories as a hobbyist outside of my day job. I published a novel last year, which is very much a space opera, which is all based around space travel. I have a few other short stories out in the world that are also based around space travel. I always have space on the brain to some extent, like that. It's never that far from my mind. I I am not a scientist by any stretch of the definition. I have a humanities degree. I didn't even take physics in high school, but I have I am what you might call a fan of popular science. It's something that's always sort of fascinated me, even if I don't know how to do the maths. Um, and more recently, it's been more on my mind than usual. In my neck of the woods, up in Scotland, there is a bit of a project going on at the moment. Up in the very northernmost tip of the British Isles, there is project ongoing called the Saxavord Spaceport. It's to be the first ever vertical launch facility for sending craft into orbit in Europe. And at the time of recording, they've not disclosed the date of their first launch yet, but it seems like it's going to be July of 2025 this year. I'm hoping to make time off work this summer to go up and see a rocket launch firsthand, because that's a bit of a bucket list item for me, and it's something I've been
Wow.
it's something I've wanted to see for as long as I've been alive. Like, as I say, last time I was on here, I think we were talking Undisputed, so I was all about, kung fu movies, and now I'm showing another side to myself. I'm also into rocket ships, because I am a sugar-addled 8-year-old at heart.
Also, death races,
Also death races, sure.
which I think fits into the sugar-addled 8-year-old mind as well.
So, but just more broadly, the sort of fascination with space, I think we've talked about this off pod, maybe a while back. July 20th, 1969, the first time man ever walked on the moon. It's sort of a moment in history that occupies. It's surprising how much of my mental real estate that takes up. I'm just continually consumed by the thought that, for 3.5 billion years, there was life on Earth. Trillions upon quadrillions of organisms that have lived and died within Earth's gravity well, never having known any other world. And that was the case until July 20th, 1969. And I feel like there's something fundamentally significant about that. I always have, ever since I was a kid. Like, it feels like cause for optimism to me, in a sort of cosmic philosophical sense. Like, as corny as that sounds, it does sort of give me. It's something that helps me wake up in the morning. It feels like the sphere of human experience has been expanded. And I don't know, that's just something I've never been able to let go of since I was a kid.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's probably one of the most significant events of the 20th century, at least. Yeah, I think it's one of those things, like you said, we'll be looking back for probably the rest of humans' existence, unless we nuke ourselves back to a stone age or something and lose our history. But otherwise, it's probably going to be like a before and after moment, for all of humanity. So, yeah.
100%.
I was wondering, Andrew, do you have a favorite space mission?
Favorite space mission? That's a tricky. Yeah, it would have to be Apollo 11 just by default. Like, that's the one that has the sort of significance to it. Apollo 13's exciting just off the the drama of it. Um, Yuri Gagarin being launched into space in 1961, obviously that has that element of drama to it, even if it was just this very short, just peeking your head above the tropopause. But by and large, I'm excited for what's coming in the next couple of years. I'm excited for the Artemis program, because this has been weirdly underreported, I think, in the media. But less than a year from now, at time of recording, it's scheduled that the first astronauts will be entering lunar orbit for the first time in over 50 years, I think. And the year after that, we're looking at another moon landing again. So it's all sort of coming back in our lifetime. So I'm very excited for Artemis 2, which hasn't happened yet. So I guess that could be an answer.
Yeah, I'm hyped for those as well. There was talk for a little while that Elon Musk was going to shut down the moon. I think he called the moon a distraction. It's all about Mars. But I want to see us go back to the moon.
Same, 100%. That's a name we're probably going to have to deal with at some point down the discussion of these movies.
Andrew, I gotta ask, since you listed Apollo 11 as your favorite, have you seen First Man?
No, weirdly, no. For some reason, I have not made time for it yet. I'm annoyed with myself because, yeah, it looks good. I'm a fan of Damien Chazelle. I'm a fan of Ryan Gosling. I should have watched it by now. I don't know why I haven't. I'm disappointed with myself.
So I almost want to say it's going to be less likely to be a favorite of yours, just because sometimes when you're close to the material, like depictions of it can bother you in ways that don't for people like me who don't have too much attachment to it.
Yeah.
And so like I came in not knowing, I mean, I kind of knew the broad strokes, but and it's kind of weird, like one of the points of First Man, well, maybe not one of the points, one of the things it depicts is that Apollo 11 was like insanely drama free given the stakes. It was like about as smooth as you could hope.
Yeah.
So it does not itself make for a good movie, like a good narrative. But my opinion, First Man is pretty close to a masterpiece. I think it's incredible, and it's like it does a great job of like still feeling like a Damien Chazelle movie, with all of like the how much do you need to sacrifice yourself in order to achieve your dreams themes that is in all of his films. And I think you should. I would be very, very curious what you think of it as someone who has a lot of attachment to the mission itself, because I think it's a tremendous film.
As would I. Yeah, I'm interested to find out what I think of it myself. The closest I came to it was watching a reaction video on YouTube done by Chris Hadfield, who I think was the first Canadian citizen in space. He's quite a charismatic public talker and communicator about space travel. And he took issue with some of the depictions in First Man, I remember. Like, he thought like the spaceship rattled more than it ought to have done, which I thought was just kind of an interesting, that sort of insider information that you wouldn't necessarily think of if you're watching it as a layperson.
Right.
Yeah, I liked First Man. What I especially liked was it showed some of the like experimental aircraft that he flew at different parts of his career to get ready for the moon.
Mm-hmm. Things
I had never heard of, like the X-1. And they made it all, look believable.
Yeah. Was the X-1, was that the one that Chuck Yeager flew originally? Like, he was the first test pilot before Neil Armstrong was in there.
It could have been. Definitely could have been. It was a rocket plane, and it could like go up to the edge of the atmosphere, and so it could go really, really, really fast.
Yeah. Again, this is the kind of stuff that I just pored over as a kid. Just these sort of popular science magazines.
Yeah, and like the first scene of the movie is he's flying in it, and he bounces off the atmosphere. He's like trying to come down, and he like a skipped stone, he starts going up again, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, just the atmospheric dynamics and the aerodynamics. It's just wild to think about. So, speaking as someone who's never been in anything faster than a commercial passenger jet, just the feats of engineering and of human endurance that go into these kind of missions. It just makes my sort of hairs on my forearms stand on end whenever I think about it.
But the space mission that I think appeals the most to me is the Voyager. that's still out there so far away.
Yeah.
And even today, we're still talking to it. And every once in a while, you'll see a headline that they somehow have fixed it. You know, it's billions of miles away, and it had a problem, and it runs on like a calculator chip, and they're still able to like keep talking with it.
Yeah, 100%. Voyager 1 is such a romantic sort of object, like the furthest piece of equipment that's ever traveled from Earth. And I think it's something like it's well outside Neptune's orbit at this point. It's something like it's coming up on the heliopause almost, and it's just going to keep going in that same direction for ever, essentially, until it crashes into something like just thousands and thousands of years potentially. And that's just it just one of those things that colonizes the imagination just to think about it.
Definitely. But the films that we're going to be discussing today, as mentioned, Woman in the Moon and Ad Astra. So why don't we kick off with Woman in the Moon? So this is a silent film, 1929, on the tail end of silent era. I know they were still kind of making them for a couple more years, but speaking of Chazelle, Babylon depicted there, and then of course in Singing in the Rain, the transition was very rapid to talkies. So I was actually really impressed at the production, and then I was like, this is like the end of silent cinema. So this is like at the peak of their ability to make stuff. But this was German. The intertitles in the version I saw were German. I had to find a subtitles track to play against the German subtitles. But Brian, did you just read them, or did you get a subtitles track in there?
It was the same situation as you, where the title cards were in German, and I did have English subtitles, because I talked about King for Burning being like dense discussion. This pretty high-level stuff also. Yeah. Very dense, lots of technical stuff. So I wasn't ready to just read the German straight.
Yeah, although I was wondering if it was different if it's written as opposed to like listening to it. I assume it's easier to read than it is to listen, because then you're kind of like transcribing and translating at the same time in your head. But maybe, I don't know.
That's true. I mean, I could have taken a crack at it, but I didn't have to. I did have English subtitles on the video file that I was watching.
Yeah, same. Thankfully, I don't speak a word of German, so it was a mercy not having to grapple with that.
Some movies actually, they'll release, if they do restorations, they'll do multi-language intertitles. So it's actually different video streams where the intertitles are in different languages. I've seen that before, it's kind of interesting, because then you're not really watching it the way that it was designed, you know? So I have watched Silence that way, where it was like initially German or initially French, and then they've actually like translated the intertitles and then pasted them on the screen in like the same font that the original intertitles were. But that feels a little dirty somehow.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the purist in me sort of revolts at that, because the intertitles in these kind of classic silence, they're not just text. They have a decorative element to them, and in places in this film, like they even get pretty elaborate in places, like they're being superimposed upon the footage. They're not necessarily consigned to these blank cards in between the shots. So I think having the German originals subtitled is kind of the way to go if you want the purity of the experience.
Yeah, with how interactive they get by the end, it would be hard to quote-unquote dub them.
Yeah.
I have seen Nosferatu with redone English subtitles. Or redone English intertitles.
Oh, nice. That might have been one of the ones I've seen too. Yeah.
I actually can't remember. I have that on Blu-ray. I might have seen the restored version with the redone subtitles. I can't recall.
So let me go ahead and ask, what is each of yours experience with Fritz Lang?
So Fritz Lang is... I have a lot of regard for Fritz Lang. He made... I mean, for one thing, my first exposure to him was Metropolis, and as a sci-fi fan, that's just like a cornerstone text. You can't really call yourself a sci-fi cinema aficionado without having an awareness of Metropolis, which I think genuinely does hold up as a viewing experience today. It's very, very watchable. It's exciting. The design elements are just breathtaking. That's not even my favorite of his films. Um, I've also seen the Die Nibelungen cycle, the adaptation of the German legend, which sort of stands as a counterpoint to the Wagner operas. Mind blowing. The second part of that, Kriemhild's Revenge, is one of my favorite movies ever. Like I have that in my top 100. I think maybe my top 50. So yeah, I think Fritz Lang is pretty incredible. He is not. I don't think he's batted 100 across his career. Like there's a couple of films he made when he came to America. I saw The Woman in the Window. Really didn't care for that one. A noir with Edward G. Robinson, which kind of glanced off me. So, like, he's not flawless, but I think he's one of these really imposing figures in cinematic history. One of these populists who just had hit after hit, hit after hit.
He was making movies for so stinking long. His earliest work was serials, as was the case of a handful of European filmmakers. So I assume Brian and Andrew, you know what serials are, but for our listeners, in case you haven't encountered them,
they're like Captain Crunch and Lucky Charms.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they were basically, before people had TVs, and even like kind of early in cinema, honestly, like right around the time of the development of the feature-length film, they had the idea of basically stringing together multiple shorts, and you would basically not see them in one go. You would see one, and then you would come back either the next day or the next week, and then see the next one, etc. And they made a lot of them then. Honestly, it kind of reminds me of like the Netflix miniseries almost, because it's not like a TV series like a sitcom, because usually it like is a preset number, like not interminable the way that a sitcom is, but kind of like when the streaming series, it almost harkens to like what British TV was for a while, where you would have like a preset number of episodes of something that you could watch, and would often, maybe not always, have like some connective tissue across the different episodes. So like a really famous one is The Vampires, Les Vampires, or something like that in French. But Long made serials. I've watched like a couple minute clips of them. I haven't seen it all the way through. I don't know if he only made one, but the only one I've heard of is called The Spiders. But I think there's DNA of serials in the movie we're going to talk about today. That's why I just spent so long talking about it.
I could see that. The other thing that warrants mentioning about Woman in the Moon, or Frau im Mond, as it's known in German, is that it was adapted from a novel by Theo von Harbo, to whom Fritz Lang at the time was married. I think that might go some way towards explaining why it's 169 goddamn minutes long.
It's indulgent, for sure.
It very much is.
Brian, go ahead. What's your experience with Fritz Lang?
So, I really, really like M, which was Fritz Lang's first sound film. I put it on my 100 film favorites. It's got Peter Lorre in a really creepy role. And it's just interesting. It's about attempts to track down and catch this serial killer, and it's like the parallel efforts of the German police force and the underground criminal world, because the like organized gangsters don't like him either. One, because his crimes are really like perverse, but also that because he's out there doing these things, it's increasing the police presence. And so they want to stop him too. And so then it's like a dual legal procedural, where one half of it is these crooks who are trying to catch the murderer. And it's pretty interesting.
I feel like that's not entirely uncommon, a structure for crime stories, where you have like you have a protagonist, maybe protagonist isn't the right word, a central subject, and you have both the law and other criminals going after them, and both of them, it's like a two-sided chase. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. You know what that's like, Dan?
What is that like, Brian?
What do you think?
Breaking Bad.
It's a little like Breaking Bad.
It's also like I watched this movie that just hit streaming on Apple Plus called Fountain of Youth, which is like almost a beat for beat knockoff of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I thought it was decently entertaining. It's of course nowhere near as good as that, but it has, in kind of the role of the Nazis, it has this group of people who are like protecting the Fountain of Youth, but it also has this element of the police chasing after them. So they're like avoiding two forces at once. So I do want to read. So I referenced the website They Shoot Pictures, Don't They? Sometimes. And they have a profile on Fritz Lang. I just wanted to read a couple of quotes from here because they pull from different books and textbooks and writers. So here is a quote from Andrew Saris, who was an early film critic. His book was really influential in 1968 called The American Cinema. This is what he wrote about Fritz Lang. Fritz Lang's cinema is the cinema of the nightmare, the fable, and the philosophical dissertation. Lang's apparent weaknesses are the consequences of his virtues. His characters never develop with any psychological precision, and his world lacks the details of verisimilitude that are so important to realistic critics. However, Lang's vision of the world is profoundly expressed by his visual forms. So that was Andrew Saris, and here's another one I want to read. This is from the book The Director's Vision by Jeff Andrew. I actually own both these books, believe it or not. But I'm reading it off the website. Few directors can have created so many images of entrapment as did Lang during his long and distinguished career. Repeatedly, his protagonists are imprisoned not only by an uncaring society or by their own flawed nature, but by destiny itself. Lang's stories, which regularly return to the theme of crime and punishment, have the rigorous logic of a philosophical theorem. So I thought that was an interesting lens through which to view Lang's cinematography. Basically that, I mean, if you kind of combine those, it's the theme of being trapped and confronting criminals and a system that's in decay, like a legal system and a society that's in decay, I think are themes in the Lang films that I've seen, which honestly is only a couple of them. The most relevant one is I have not seen Metropolis and I have not seen M, which I really need to correct both, but I have seen Dr. Mabusa the Gambler, also known as Dr. Mabusa the Player.
Oh, yeah. So I started watching that. It's a 4-hour long movie. I, unfortunately, when I had made the attempt, I tapped out after an hour. So I need to get back to that at some point.
I think that is it kind of mirrors the experience of this, which is that it has the DNA of a serial. And when it's kind of all mashed together into like one extra long film, you're like, this is too much for a single feature film. Like this needed to be pared down and this needed to be edited more tightly given the modern viewing context. But that one was actually released in 2 parts, whereas I don't think the Woman in the Moon was released in 2 parts.
No, I think that's a germane point you make actually, because yeah, the style of pacing, of course, you remember back in the 20s, the feature length film did not exist in as precise a form as it does nowadays. Sometimes films could run 40 minutes, sometimes they could run 7 hours. It was much more of a sort of Wild West kind of environment back then. But coming to Woman in the Moon now, which, as I've had it presented to me, doesn't feature an intermission or anything like that. There's no natural break point. It does get pretty exhausting, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's 169 minutes, so that's a little short of 3 hours. So, like, there are movies made that are that long, you know? Like, I even watched The Brutalist. That was 3.5 hours. Granted, that one had an intermission from this past year, but, like, 3-hour movies are not unheard of. But this one, its pacing is odd. It doesn't feel like it's 3 hours of material.
To me, it was that it took 50 minutes for anybody to, like, even really start talking about going to the moon. I mean, they were discussing, like, the possibility of moon travel, because there's the mad professor character who that's his whole deal. But, like, they go into a room with the sinister cabal of, like, Illuminati businessmen, and they show, like, a film strip of, here is how we will go to the moon. And that's at, like, the 52-minute mark.
Yeah. So I think what we're all being too polite to say here is that the first hour is death.
So I don't know if I would go quite that far. I think it's a slog, but I don't think it's without merit, because I was really struck. I mean, one of the quotes I just read talked about his power with image, and I don't know, like, this is one of those things that people who watch a lot of old movies will say, like, modern movies don't have images anymore. You know, they don't have, they have motion. They don't have images. And I'm going to sort of come off as a fuddy-duddy, but, like, I really felt that here. It's like, even when he's just showing people talking, he, like, finds really interesting ways to, like, block characters or, like, frame the scene to, like, really make you feel what that character is feeling through the image itself. And some of it is, like, almost montage style image where it's, like, associative. Like, there's this recurring image of a hat that someone has discarded, like, slowly burning as one of the main characters goes crazier and crazier. And or maybe that, who knows why, like, it's up to you, the viewer, to, like, associate that image with what you're seeing happening on the screen. And I do find, like, if I'm watching a silent movie, I can kind of get into, like, a groove where I'm just kind of, like, blissed out, almost, like, soaking it in. And I got a little bit of the way there, but it does drag, because I was with you, Brian, where I was like, wait, when does the moon come in again here? I have one or two other things I want to bring up before we actually dive in. But do any of you have anything you want to mention?
I'll just say I have not seen Metropolis beyond a few clips. I really need to watch it. Apparently that one also was based on a novel by Thea von Harbu.
That's interesting that it's based, because I was actually I had been assuming this would have come before Metropolis, but it actually came after Metropolis, because it almost feels like the imagery is like a warm-up for going really radical with depicting, like, a sci-fi future. So I was a little surprised to see that this actually came after Metropolis.
Yeah, you would think. It does feel kind of more primitive in a way. It does feel like this sort of went in the wrong order. And I take what you're saying, Dan, about the early scenes. I actually really like the set design of Manfeld's apartment, which I thought was quite expressive. Like this very expressive vision of poverty, where he's given these long sequences where he's dragging this three-legged chair over to the dinner table and has to prop it up with all these dusty old books, and all the walls are scrawled over with scientific diagrams and illustrations of his decades of obsession with lunar travel. So there is, like, visual interest there, but I think, like, to use a phrase that Brian's used sometimes, like, when are they going to get to the fireworks factory? Was kind of a recurring thought I had.
I'm glad you said that. This was the movie that I thought that the hardest, because I feel like with rocketry such a prominent theme, it's almost literal here.
Yeah.
A couple other things I want to mention. One is the timing of this. So this movie came out in 1929. Weirdly, it's almost okay. So the Wright brothers' first flight was 1903.
Mm-hmm.
So we're about a quarter century after that, and then we're a little less than 40 years until the actual moon launch. It really is kind of crazy how fast human society went from, like, the very first flight to actually landing on the moon successfully and making it back to Earth afterwards. I mean, it's actually kind of mind-blowing. It did it in, what was it, like 64 years or 66 years or something like that? Kind of insane.
Yeah, 66 years. Yeah, it is wild. And that actually sort of leads us neatly into sort of the lead that we've buried when talking about this film. Um, Kind of the most significant name attached to this, other than Fritz Lang, is the scientific consultant who was working on it, who is one Hermann Oberth. Um, Hermann Oberth was a Romanian-German rocket scientist, I believe. He published the Ways to Space Flight in 1923, which is kind of the entire Bible of like 20th century rocket science. And he was a direct influence on the work of Werner von Braun when he was developing the V2 rocket.
Yeah, I mean, we see this ship in the movie, and it's a V2.
It is, yeah.
You could just tell, like, he's got the paperwork ready to go to make this thing.
Yeah.
So, I found it. I mean, obviously, they were still 40 years away from it, and nobody knew what space was like yet. But the approximate design of spaceflight and like the moon, and like they didn't get it quite right, but like they got it more right than you would expect from something that was 40 years away from actually landing on the moon, you know?
Remarkably so. Yeah, it's quite striking to see it today and realize that the actual principles involved in designing these rockets really didn't change very much in the subsequent 40 years before the actual launch of the Apollo 11 mission.
And you compare that to like, well, of course, one of the first movies that we still kind of recognize as a canonical film is 1902's A Trip to the Moon by Georges Méliès, that's not how you say it in French. That's how I say it in my head when I read it.
Sorry, Gavin.
Another recurring theme of mine and Brian's. Sorry, Gavin, for that pronunciation. He got on us today because we got the definition of confiserie wrong in the episode we released about Mystery Team.
Confiserie.
Anyways, I know that the Méliès short is like a silly little whimsy fantasy film that's 15 minutes long or less, as opposed to this, which is a 3-hour epic consulted with rocket scientists. But like, I think it's kind of reflective of how fast our understanding of space and space flight evolved. That one is just like, oh, we're gonna walk around and there'll be aliens up there and you'll bonk them with a stick and they'll disappear. And like, nobody really knew what space or the moon were like before then, you know? I mean, maybe they knew more than this, but still.
At the same time, I still feel like a Jules Verne influence on this.
Oh, yeah.
The structure where you've got, the mentor professor and the promising pupil, and they're going to undertake the voyage, and each person is kind of a type. And it's got that feeling of Journey to the Center of the Earth, especially, but also like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or what's the one where they're in a blimp? I think it's called like Master of the Air.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, as I recall, Hermann Oberth, when he was coming up with his real theories of spaceflight, like his actual very serious like scientific treatises, like he was directly influenced by Jules Verne's novels about moon travel. That he published back in like the 1860s or something. And after he got those published, he actually involved himself in the development of this film. And as a promotional stunt for Woman in the Moon, there was supposed to be a rocket getting designed to launch in real life. That didn't really pan out, but it did lead to Werner von Braun's involvement with the Nazi war machine, which subsequently led to the Americans capturing a cache of V2 rockets in the 1940s, and those were the ones that took the first images of the Earth from outer space. Like, there's this weird back and forth that's taken place over decades and decades between science fiction and actual scientific advancement. It kind of makes your head spin to realize how closely yoked the two things were.
That is kind of crazy. Something you just said that I want to build on is the last thing I wanted to kind of prelude our discussion with. You mentioned, of course, that this is a German film. The scientist, German, and worked for the Nazis. This came out in 1929 in Germany. So I don't think this is the right episode to really dig into German Expressionism. I can't remember if we've ever actually talked about it on the pod very much. I've read a whole lot about it. One of the most famous books of film criticism ever was actually one of the first ones. It's called From Caligari to Hitler. And it came out in 1947, as the World War II was just wrapping. And basically, it remains a controversial book. I think some of its sociological points have been pretty thoroughly refuted at this point, or at least hotly debated. But the gist of it is basically like, and again, this was kind of novel because people didn't really talk about movies in this way prior to really this book, and then like the emerging field of film criticism and film studies as like an academic art.
Yeah.
But basically, the thesis of this book was that, in short, German Expressionism mirrored themes felt by the German public, which would ultimately lead to Nazism rising. And so what you kind of see in German Expressionism are some ideas, not that the films like caused people to feel these things, but that it kind of reflected what people were already feeling in Germany, with essentially a combination of like what you might call self-loathing and despair, like a need to be led out of this darkness, and like society couldn't be trusted, and like there were these conspiracies keeping society down and keeping normal people down. And one way this was manifest is basically a lot of stories had fantasy of getting wealthy through some unlikely circumstance. And you definitely see that in here with like a lot of those things in this movie. I don't know if you would call this a German expressionist film, but what do you see here? There is a conspiracy, a criminal conspiracy. There is the dream of rapid wealth. And there is like a culture that is keeping good ideas down, keeping good people down. In this case, in different ways we can talk about. And I don't know, I thought it was kind of fascinating. I've read a couple chapters of that book. I haven't read it, the whole thing. I got a digital copy of it and read a little bit of it, but I think it's interesting to view this in the lens of like where German culture was at the time. One movie you see where you have like the fantasy of rapid wealth is The Last Laugh, which I actually just recommended Andrew watch.
Yes.
And I understand you recorded a podcast on it.
Yeah, that's in the can as of this recording. Yeah, so I did just see The Last Laugh, so I see the sort of parallels you're drawing there. And yeah, it is curious to say the way that you see the same impulses manifested across wildly different genres. That's kind of a domestic drama, whereas this is a space opera. But in both instances, there are these kind of images of this sort of put upon, downtrodden elderly gentleman who has a sort of line to sort of sudden exponential wealth. In this case, the idea of gold on the moon that is being sort of withheld from him from the sort of forces of society. And with regard to how that sort of reflects the sort of fascistic impulses in Germany at the time, something I find really interesting is the cabal that you described. I think you mentioned, Brian, they're almost like Illuminati-esque. And when I hear, in a German film from 1929, a cabal of financiers who are sort of working to sabotage scientific innovation and, sort of subvert the sort of upstanding, tall, broad-shouldered German hero from achieving his goals, my alarm bells go off. It's like, oh, this is going to get into some anti-Semitism, isn't it?
Yeah, we got some Elders of Zion here.
Except the interesting thing is that I don't think it's visually coded that way.
No, because there's like a Chinese or Japanese scientist, and they specify that they are like from many nations.
Yeah.
It's almost like the what is it in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Dan? There's like the White Lotus Society.
Yeah.
Exactly.
White Lotus, that's it.
Yeah. So what I wonder what I wonder might be going on here, Theo von Harbo and Fritz Lang divorced not long after this movie was made. And probably, I have to speculate here a little bit, but I have to imagine that probably a reason for that divorce might have had something to do with her being a Nazi collaborator.
Yeah, they took opposite sides. Interesting to think about how the people involved in this movie kind of split over that issue, because you got the rocket scientists who would go on to Peenemünde, and Thea von Harbour also on the opposite side of the divide from Fritz Lang, who fled to America.
Exactly that.
I do want to, I don't know who the right person is, but like, I want someone, and maybe it's just you, Brian, since you took German for a long time, but I want someone who's like, who knows a lot about Weimar Republic Germany to come on the pod and talk about German Expressionism, because I feel like that would be a really interesting, like, to take what we're starting with here and building on it. Because I like go back, we mentioned Nosferatu here, and I think there's some stuff there too that you can align with some of these things, and just all of the, of course, Dr. Caligari's, what is it called? His cabinet of something.
Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah. So I think that would be an interesting episode. We don't necessarily need to belabor it here, but
I'm not an expert by any means. Essentially, they lost World War I, and it was in such a way that they just kind of declared, okay, well, the war is over. It wasn't as, like, scorched earth as the end of World War II was, and so that, it left things unresolved in some ways.
Yeah, the Treaty of Versailles and a lot of really punitive sanctions on Germany for a long while after the war, despite the fact they weren't really the ones who started it, so there was a lot of sort of resentment brewing under the surface for the subsequent decade.
Right, and then you've got some more, like, global issues where we're heading into the Great Depression, and is, like, liberal democracy the right kind of government to have, because it seems to not be producing solid economies? So is the answer to, like, have a workers' rebellion, or is it that we need to get back to traditional roots and embrace, I don't know, fascist strength, or who can say? But there were these different extremist ideologies that were warring, like, literally fighting in the streets. And so the whole Weimar setup, at least as it's understood in hindsight, is tenuous. It's like it's not gonna last forever. Whatever form the future takes, this is a temporary state of affairs.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then you compare that to Soviet cinema, which was coming at it from like totally different angles at the same time. I mean, particularly, you had a lot of leftist montage cinema coming up with, what's that guy's name?
Eisenstein. Is that
Eisenstein,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I feel like that would be, I don't know.
It would be a fascinating contrast. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the ways that, particularly in the 20s and 30s, that you could see the politics of different nations in their cinema, and not necessarily like nations as a whole, but like factions within nations. Because even some American cinema, I think you have some interesting things to kind of break down, like All Quiet on the Western Front and stuff. But anyways, Woman in the Moon, 1929. You can kind of cover the first hour and just like a little bit of exposition. So our main character is this guy named Helios. I guess he's like an entrepreneur. He's not a scientist himself, but he's like friends with Professor Manfelt, who is like a stereotypical mad scientist academic. And he's got the Professor Manfelt has this theory in this paper. He has like this really cool looking manuscript. It's like pages and pages kind of bound together of his theory that there is gold on the moon. So Helios is drawn to this idea. We can go to the moon, like Professor Manfelt is talking about.
Yeah,
But-
a couple things here. The professor keeps holding up this book, and we get real close-up view of the title, which is Hypothetische Darstellung des Goldgehaltes der Mondgebirge, which is hypothetical, like, diagrams of the gold content of the moon mountains. But
Great.
I really like the phrase Goldgehaltes der Mondgebirge. It's fun to say.
It's a couple of things at once there. First of all, like anyone trying to sort of pronounce a German multi-syllable phrase phonetically, who's an English speaker, inevitably comes off sounding like the Swedish chef from the Muppets. Second of all, turns out this isn't as implausible as it sounds 100 years later. The moon is a satellite of Earth. It was created by the same sort of processes of the sort of early solar system that our planet was. So it's actually perfectly reasonable to believe that there would be gold on the moon and that it could be mined. Probably wouldn't exist in the same configurations as on Earth, but this is actually less insane than the sort of pulp scenario would suggest.
Gold on the moon.
Gold on the moon.
Both of these movies, Ad Astra especially, had me thinking about like the first episode of Futurama, or it might be the first episode after the pilot. But they go to visit the moon, this space delivery company where Fry works, and by this point, 1,000 years in the future, going to the moon is like the most commonplace thing you can do. And it's basically only for tourists. It's like, just checking a box to go to the moon. But they have like a dark ride, like a small world dark ride, talking about early history of moon exploration, and they say that the whalers went to explore the moon and found that there weren't any whales there. So that's what I was thinking of here.
So Helios and Manfelt start thinking about a space trip, very slow boiling within the film. Meanwhile, the other scientists really are not buying into this. It actually had me thinking of the League of Scientists in A Trip to the Moon, because they're kind of like holding court together. Or it's like what you imagine when you hear the Frankenstein story, where he's showing off to all the other scientists, here's Frankenstein. But they're booing him, they're jeering him and his ideas about gold on the moon.
It's a lot of like monocles popping out and a lot of most unorthodox, that kind of thing. But apparently there is a contingent of the scientific community that takes his ideas more seriously than he realized, because they're trying to steal his manuscript and they're trying to essentially, scoop him on getting to the moon first and claiming its mineral resources. And to this end, there's a whole bunch of industrial espionage going on in this first hour, where the villain Turner shows up, who looks very Hitler-coded to me.
Yeah, he's got like an even worse version of Hitler's comb-over.
Yeah. And he essentially blackmails Helios into signing his rocket operation over to this cabal of financiers and taking him along on the trip with them is the gist.
Right. So this guy was really interesting. This Turner is what he says his name is, but I think he's credited as Der Mann, the man. So he's like, I think that's like an alias, and he has this, I don't even know how they shot it, but like this quick change disguise of his face. And like he just moves his hand and he has a different face. How did they shoot this? I'm not sure. Did you?
That was a really good edit. I have to give them credit for that. I don't know quite how they pulled that off.
It must be an edit, because I can't imagine like you can do something with your hands to actually make it look different just by pulling something on or off of it. So
yeah. One part of this early hour of the film that I did like is the reason Helios is so ready to go to the moon is because he's blown his shot with this girl that he's interested in.
Yeah, Frida.
It's like the decision to go to sea or join the army, but it's like, well, I have this crazy friend who's trying to go to the moon, and I might as well do that, and if I die, it doesn't matter.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that to me is like a major connection to Ad Astra too. But yeah, that's the other main subplot of this first hour. So he's in love with this woman named Frida. By the way, very pretty actress. I don't know who she is, but she's engaged to Helios's assistant, who is named
Vindegger, I think is his name.
I wrote it down as Windegger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's with a W, but they, in German.
And then I thought it was funny. Helios named his rocket the Frida, and they're like, "Oh, I wonder why he did that, huh?" That's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's like the Audrey too.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get that. But it's about at the midway, actually, probably a bit short of the midway point of the movie, where we do get to the actual rocket launch sequence, which I thought was really well. This is where the film starts to pick up for me, which is really well realized with this sort of various uses of miniatures and these sort of different shot scales. It does quite convincingly bring across the scale of this event as the rocket slowly is lined up and submerged in this buoyancy pool before it can launch. It's it's remarkably convincing. I mean, there are sort of tells like the lights don't look quite to scale, but on the whole, it really throws you just how well these effects hold up almost a century later.
Yeah, this was really cool and like true to life, true to what ended up getting built in a lot of ways, because they've got this gantry vehicle that transports the rocket standing up out onto the launch pad.
Yeah, yeah. I visited Cape Canaveral actually when I was like 10 years old, and some of the sort of gigantic equipment, the movers, the moving platforms, really made an impression on me back when I was that young. And it's striking just how close to life this simulation actually was. Because of course, I mean, the engineering and the science behind it were fundamentally understood at this time, but it's it is weird to realize, when audiences were watching this in the 20s, all of this was hypothetical, and there's just something almost vertigo-inducing about that, I feel.
There's this shot, it's maybe like almost a minute long, and it's shot from underneath the rocket, with the rocket pulling towards the camera on this big crane or whatever it is, this mechanism to get it to its launch pad. And I don't think I would want to watch this whole movie on a big screen. It would just be so slow to just sit there and not be able to take a break watching it for almost 3 hours. But man, I would love to see like the half-hour greatest hits of this movie on a big screen.
Oh, 100%.
Particularly that moment when like the rocket just comes dawning over you. I mean, I was getting chills from how incredible some of this imagery was. It was terrifically shot, I thought. And one thing I'll say, the copy that we have is really, really sharp. With a lot of silent cinema, even like great movies that are really important, we don't necessarily have the best copies of them still, but this was a very, very sharp transfer that we have. I don't know how much restoration was involved or if they just had a pristine copy or what, but it looks really, really good, I thought.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of negatives floating around at the time because it was distributed in the United States back in the 20s, so this did have some international pull. So I gather there were quite a lot of surviving copies that they were able to draw on. But you're right, it does look very sharp and very vivid today still.
So the people on the ship after once it takes off. So we have the main character, Helios. We have the mad professor, Professor Manfelt. We also have Turner, who's like the representative from the evil businessman who took over the operation. And then we also have Vindegger and Frida come along for reasons that are, I think like they mentioned it and I didn't quite understand it, why they had to come. But sure, they're along too. And then there's also this stowaway who's this little kid who I couldn't remember if we saw him. Did we see him before takeoff?
Oh God, it's dim for me in my memory at this point. Gustav, yeah. The thing with the kid is that he's fascinated with like pulp sci-fi magazines. He's got this sort of serial, these very cheaply printed serials about adventures on Venus. And he's got this swashbuckling protagonist that he looks up to and that he wants to emulate. What sort of threw me is like, for a film this committed to scientific accuracy, presumably having a stowaway on the ship is going to do hell to like the fuel mass ratio. That's going to cause problems before they even get anywhere.
Well, and then we'll see at the end, like, there's a big deal about is there enough oxygen for X number of people? Well, you got an extra person on there. I mean, I guess maybe that throws off the math. That's part of the reason why. But yeah.
Yeah. This actor's name is Gustl Gestettenbauer.
Oh, marvelous.
Is this kid?
Do you think you could guess his ethnicity based off his name, Brian?
Yeah, I can make a pretty good guess. It's like Augustus Gloop level.
And this was another connection to Ad Astra. There's a significant stowaway there, as we'll talk about. But a couple things. So they talk a lot about G-forces and the way that they kind of depict, like, you know, the classic image of like now post actual Apollo 11, when we see people taking off, it's like they're in these prone in these kind of like seat things, and your face flaps when you're in the spacesuit, and you kind of go get knocked out until you get out of the atmosphere into space. But the way they depict this is like most people just kind of stand around and walk, but some people are like knocked out cold as if they inhaled a gas that knocked them out or something. So this is one where they didn't quite depict it as it would end up being. But I thought that was kind of interesting. And then it's like a thing is they need to keep you awake so you don't die. Like you need to get your like body system back online after you get hit by the G-forces.
Yeah. They spend a while explaining what G-force is, and then they told the actors, okay, now you're feeling the G-force. And they act in response to that in different ways.
But it's funny because people around them aren't feeling it. They're just kind of standing there like, oh, he's feeling the G-forces.
Yeah. It's another instance of a way this film is a fascinating sort of historic document, because, you know, Einstein had published, you know, the theory of relativity at this point, and we had, you know, knowledge of the equivalence principle and how gravity worked under these sort of circumstances. But the idea of G-forces were so abstract for audiences at this point. So the idea of that, you know, if you're an audience member going to see this in 1929, chances are the fastest you've ever gone is maybe on like a steam train at maybe 50 miles an hour. So the whole idea of acceleration acting upon your body is presumably kind of an esoteric, unthinkable concept. So in a way, like it does feel kind of quaint and at the same time also really forward-looking. What I found kind of funny is the fact that they have to pull these levers on the console on the ship, and in order to get to these levers, they have to lean over like the steel bars of their cot. And it's like why would you design it like this? It's
Yeah.
The most unergonomic design imaginable.
Another thing depicted is weightlessness, and it's still not quite right, but they got it better than I would have guessed.
Yeah.
You have the whole image of like somebody like just kind of floating around in the cockpit. And the way that they kind of deal with the weightlessness is there are these leather straps on the ground. So you like put your foot in there, and that prevents you. That's like the traction you need, like the grip you need to stay on the ground and like move from spot to spot. But then someone's able to like step out of the straps and like launch themselves upward in a very impressive effect. Some of this I was like, it's really cool that they did this they were doing this in the 20s.
Yeah, they had a few good tricks in this part. Like the wine doesn't come out when you turn the bottle upside down, so you have to kind of like jerk it to get a few, you know, a little bit of the wine.
Yeah. This is something that sort of occurred to me when I was putting together the pitch for this episode. Is I was thinking about what films historically, like over more than 100 years, have tried to depict space travel realistically, and the answer is like not as many as you'd think, all things considered. On the whole, space travel has generally been depicted in more fantastical ways. You know, you think of movies like, I don't know, from the 50s, like This Island Earth or Forbidden Planet, or after that we get to Star Trek and Star Wars. All of them sort of take artificial gravity as, like, almost as a given. Just because, frankly, that's easier to film.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ways to fake realistic spaceflight counterintuitively are actually much harder to do than the fantastical version, and that's kind of affected, you know, why it's really only the sort of high-end effects companies who've ever really tried to take a crack at it.
Right. That is kind of interesting that it's easier to just be like, oh, we have technology that makes it so that you don't have to worry about gravity anymore. But yeah, that's I did find I think it was really interesting though. The one thing that really stands out as like this doesn't feel like quote unquote realistic space travel does, like even more than the G-forces, even more than the weightlessness, is that everybody's just wearing street clothes in the ship. Nobody's in a spacesuit.
That's a good point. And it's not because they didn't have the props, because we do see them wearing specialized suits later on in the film, don't we?
Right. Yeah, I guess they just, for whatever reason, there's this thing that I read in high school. I don't know if it's like based off of a famous work or anything like that, or this was just an observation in this textbook I read. But the observation was, if you look at the marketing of the TV over time, like when the TV first came out, they sold it as like looking like a cabinet. They decorated it so that it looked like a cabinet, like something that was already in your room, so that it would feel like you would be able to imagine it being in your room when you went to go buy it, if you didn't know what a TV was yet, or like you had never lived with a TV before. So like early on, it was to try to make it look like just another piece of furniture. It was like a main marketing thing. Whereas as time passed, you want to know, I want the most advanced space agey TV, big black box that dominates the wall and like looks super futuristic. Like once you know what a TV is, you want the best and most powerful TV. You don't care about like having it feel like other furniture, because you're like not scared of the novelty of it anymore. Now you can like kind of accept the altered reality of the TV. And it's kind of an obtuse comparison, but I was kind of thinking about that because like this is like might have been some of the first depiction of space travel. So they need to like make it look sort of like real life, but also sort of like, here's how it's different. And then as time passed, like even going into Ad Astra today, when you see space travel now, you want it to be like more abstracted and like really emphasize how it would feel strange and different to like really make it stand out. Like, because if I saw some of the stuff that they have in the old one in a modern film, I'd be like, oh, they're just like in a set. Like it doesn't feel like space travel.
That's an interesting line of thinking. I hadn't considered that, but yeah, I think you're onto something there. But no, yeah, I think that's probably something that probably is it. They don't have the specialized equipment for the wine. Yeah, they don't have particular clothes or suits that they wear to get on the ship. Yeah, the exoticism of it is kind of toned down, isn't it?
Right. It's almost like counterintuitively it's toned down, because it's like to help the audience understand what it would be like, they make it seem like it's more a normal everyday thing or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Because again, like we're arriving at, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, that the first image of the curvature of the Earth was taken in, I think, 1947. I need to double check that, but in this movie, we see this effect shot of the Earth disappearing behind the moon's horizon, which is something that only exists as a kind of hypothetical for audiences.
I did think about that. It's like, how do they know what the globe looks like? R/flat Earth talking there.
Yeah.
It's like, I guess, no, there's ways to know that the globe is round, but it did stick out to me. It's like nobody had actually seen that yet.
No, exactly. So again, it's just the sort of historical perspective that messes with your brain. That's what I keep coming back to with this movie.
They do finally land on the moon. Still really cool effects when they're landing on the moon. It's like they show it as like kind of almost sandy, and we wouldn't have known exactly what it was going to be like until we got there. But it's still, I thought, it felt more moon-like than other earlier depictions of the moon. It seems like Long kind of thought about what the moon might actually look like before he shot this.
Yeah. I think the black and white cinematography helps it out a lot, because you've got the kind of high contrast elements, the light glancing off the sand. You get the sense of the texture of it. I think it would be diminished if it was in color. And it probably would still be, even if it had been shot decades later.
Right, yeah. So now that they're on the moon, the first thing they're trying to figure out is like breathing on the moon, which again, that's something that stands out when you go watch A Trip to the Moon. The French one is like people are just walking around the moon in their academic robes, you know, but they do go out first in this spacesuit that not that different from what the first spacesuits ended up being, and they have to figure out, is the air breathable? So they light a match because I guess the thought is if the air would permit a flame to burn, then it has sufficient oxygen for you to breathe, and the match does light. So then they're like, oh, you can come out and you can breathe this air. And I guess this is supposed to be on the far side of the moon. Is that right? The dark side?
That's the implication. Yeah, apparently, and this is sort of the scientific reach that I find a little bit harder to credit, is the idea that the far side of the moon exclusively has an atmosphere. I'm pretty sure that didn't really fly even in 1929.
Gotcha. That might be the one where they're like, nobody wants us to film people in spacesuits. It would be impractical.
Well, that's the other thing, because it's a silent film, isn't it? They need their faces.
Right. Good point. So what are a couple of the things we see once they actually get off the moon? Brian and Andrew.
So they get creative with the intertitles several times here, because once they figure out the air is breathable, I feel like there's only half an hour left in the movie. Like we're pretty far in now. And the professor pulls out a dowsing rod, which is another instance of, you know, 3/4 of the movie we've been really good with the scientific devotion, and now suddenly he's like a Mormon diviner or something. He's going around with this thing to find water, because if there's air there, sure, there must be water on the moon. And so he's following this thing around, the Y-shaped stick like you see in the cartoons, and it guides him up into the mountains, and he finds gold. And the title cards just go bonkers. Gold. He's shouting gold, 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 and like the word gold flies off of the title cards and is like buzzing around the characters. I had never seen this before.
This is really cool. I've never seen it quite so involved. Like they have a little bit of that, and like even as far back as Caligari had a couple things sort of like this, but this one was, I actually laughed out loud because I guess gold is the German word for gold. I mean, it makes sense, but the fact that it was a word I recognized and gold, 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 like popping up, I thought that was pretty funny.
It does add to it. Yeah, like this is probably the most expressionistic gesture in the whole movie, where it becomes that it's really leaning into that sort of theatrical artifice. And I really like I imagine some of this must have been done on location. These muddy sort of caves that Manfeld wanders through in search of the gold. He's tramping through like up to his ankles in mud, and you've got these, I guess we'd call them geysers, just popping up with the underground gases. It's quite a vivid depiction. It's underscored by a lot of really good matte painting shots where you see the jagged mountains of the moon in the distance that don't quite look earthly. They're a bit too ragged, a bit too sharp. So it's a convincing like alien planet for the time.
Right. I imagine the moon like much flatter and like less caverns than we see here.
Yeah.
I don't actually know what the moon is like, but at least what you typically see, you see like long plains of rock and sand and dust.
No, I think that's exactly right, because the moon is not tectonically active in reality. But again, we're getting back to the sort of, we're allowed to have these sort of flights of fancy because we didn't really know at that point.
Right. So one turning point here on the moon is that when he finds the gold, this being the mad professor guy, what's his name, Manfelt, then the guy who's with the secret cabal, Walter Turner, he comes and he's like, oh, here's the gold, and he like startles or like gets in an argument with the mad scientist Manfelt, who then like falls into the cavern and dies. So He dies there. But I thought it was interesting. Like, I thought the obvious thing would have been to have him, to have Turner kill him. So he didn't directly kill him. It was like he was kind of hoisted on the greedy celebration of his own, the correctness of his theory, you know, rather than literally being killed by the conspiracy guy.
Yeah, there's a bit of Icarus, Flight of Icarus imagery going on, I think.
Yeah, yeah. But they still, the rest of the crew, he like tries to hide that the professor's dead, which was not a good strategic decision. And then he's going to like steal gold and hijack the rocket and fly back. Again, not a strategic decision. Like, they're going to be heading back eventually. You don't need to hijack the rocket.
Yeah, also at this point, Windiger is going nuts. And he hadn't really had much character before this, other than we knew that Helios doesn't like him. Like, they used to be friends, and then Windiger ended up with Frida. So Helios is salty. But, like, as soon as they land, Windiger is freaking out about, okay, let's go back. Time to go back.
And yeah, there's like a fight that breaks out between Helios and Turner, in the course of which they rupture one of the oxygen tanks. I think Turner is defeated, if I'm remembering rightly, but they only have enough oxygen to get part of the crew back. Somebody has to stay behind. So it becomes this whole dilemma about them drawing straws to determine which of them is going to remain on the moon, which they don't seem to treat as a death sentence, oddly enough.
No, because you can breathe on the moon. It really kind of takes the, like, Armageddon-style stakes out.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. Like, food would be the big one, but they have like a camp set up. Am I wrong, or do they even say like, oh, and then you'll come back and get whoever gets left behind?
I think that's the implication. Like, they're going to be there for a while, but they're but
it's not like a death sentence, as you said.
It takes a bit of the air out of the drama at the end there.
There's also this is where the romantic melodrama kind of falls in line with what's going on with the moon journey, because Frida detects that Helios is in love with her and essentially seems to feel the same way. She's not very committal one way or the other, but there's definitely like moments where they're like exchanging goo eyes, you know, like they're into each other.
Yeah, it's like she suddenly has the realization that Windiger is a loser.
Yeah, and kind of crazy, neurotic. So the way that what Andrew was mentioning, where they have to like choose who's gonna stay, is Windiger loses the draw, so he's gonna have to stay. But Helios, being noble, is like, no, I will accept that I cannot have Frida, and as such, I will strand myself on the moon. And puts like the sleeping potion. Good thing you brought sleeping potion on your trip to the moon, by the way. Put sleeping potion in their drinks so that Windiger and Frida fall asleep. And then he tells Gustav, like, okay, just take off. I'm going to stay here. There's enough oxygen for you guys. And so that's what happens. And then there's the surprise ending, which is that Frida figured out what was going on and decided to stay with Helios on the moon. So I guess just Gustav and Windiger are flying back. Windiger is not going to be too thrilled when he wakes up. He thought, or maybe he would be, I don't know. He thought he was going to be staying on the moon. He's going to wake up, or he's on the rocket ship, not on the moon. But his fiance and his boss are now stuck on the moon together.
Yeah,
I don't know.
He's been moon cucked. So
moon cucked. I like that.
So yeah, it's a very sentimental ending, but it feels earned, like as a gesture. I think it feels sort of appropriate to the tone up to that point. So yeah, I'm kind of into it.
I agree. I kind of like how the different thrusts of the story, the epic space quest that's dramatic, as well as the romantic melodrama, and even like the stuff with the professor and people not believing him. They kind of all comes together in a pretty excellent final half hour. I noticed that in the other Fritz Lang movie that I watched that was like 2 hours too long, the Der Spieler, what's his name?
Dr. Mabusa.
Dr. Mabusa.
Yeah, Mabusha Der Spieler. That is kind of the same thing where it's got all these threads that kind of seem barely related, and then it kind of comes to a head in the really terrific last half hour or hour. But that's how Woman in the Moon. So any parting thoughts on that before we jump to Ad Astra?
Yeah, just in terms of final thoughts, one thing that did occur to me is that this film was sort of quasi remade in the States in like 1950 when it was called Destination Moon, which has essentially just almost exactly the same kind of finale, which is the astronauts having to, unload weight from the ship so that they can get back to Earth safely, and they have to pick who gets left behind. Um, Destination Moon is also like half this movie's length, so there is that.
All right. Ad Astra. So Ad Astra 2019, directed by James Gray, who I understand, maybe it's just a couple of podcasts I listened to, pretty well regarded critically, although actually looking at the reviews for his different movies among people that I follow, it's kind of divisive, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think he's ever had like a consistent hit that's wowed critics and audiences alike.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was surprised. So I've seen, this was my second movie by James Gray. I also saw the film Armageddon Time, which came out in 2022. Is like a coming of age movie about how racism is bad. And I was surprised that he was American, because sometimes when a movie just like feels just a little bit off to me, I look up the director and it's like, oh, they were English, or they were Australian, or they were Canadian. For whatever reason, like, I don't know, sometimes just like the storytelling rhythms were off. And I was kind of expecting, because James Gray, the storytelling rhythms, just for me, are always just a little bit off, at least across two movies.
It is worth mentioning that the film I think he made directly before this one was The Lost City of Zed, and it is quite specifically The Lost City of Zed, not Z. So that might have had something to do with that perception.
I don't know if I knew that, but that certainly would have fueled that, yeah.
So there you go.
So this movie came out 2019, and it stars Brad Pitt, and it's one of these space travel movies where almost like Castaway, not exactly like Castaway, but it's like really just a one-man show, or like The Martian is another one. Not to say there aren't supporting cast, but like it's not an ensemble piece like Apollo 13. It all rests on this one actor, I would say.
Yeah, very much so. Like to that's pretty much the entire the thematic thrust of the movie, just how in his own head and how isolated he is in his experience of everything he's going through. There are other people around him, but they don't really register in his very subjective headspace, I would say.
So the goofiness of okay, I'll just give, maybe we can do some high level thoughts on Ad Astra before we dive in. Something that will kind of color my perception of all of it is that this is a very, very earnest film. And it's so self-serious that you really need to be on its wavelength. And if you're off even a little bit on its wavelength, I think you might admire its production and its spirit, but it's just going to seem kind of corny. And that's kind of where I landed overall on this one, as we'll kind of talk about.
Yeah. So that was basically my read too. So you said that the astronaut is like very isolated and it's just him, and like that's kind of the point. The setup is almost, you get a lot of narration from him, and he frames it at the start of, oh, to be a good astronaut, you need to cut yourself off from earthly things. And then, wouldn't you know it, the moral of the story is you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
It's like, you shouldn't seek the stars to connect with aliens, because what really matters is connecting with other people. And saying that sentence, it's just a much faster way to consume the point of the movie.
Yeah, I take that point. So a little bit of where I'm coming from with this movie for me. So I've just seen Ad Astra once before. I saw it when it came out in September of 2019. I loved it when I saw it the first time, but that needs to be caveated. Because here's the thing. I saw this when I was bumming around in Vancouver for a couple of weeks. I'd just been doing a long distance through hike in North America. I'd basically finished my time there. I was waiting on my flight to go home, and I was just sort of hanging around in a youth hostel until I could catch my plane. I was quite sick. I had a really bad cold that week. And just to pass the time, I was, um, how can I put this euphemistically? I was availing myself of certain herbs and spices that are legal in Canada that my own home country takes a dimmer view of. So seeing Ad Astra in a big screen, I think it was like a LIMAX screen, um, was it just about blew the top of my head off in the state of mind I was at the time. So coming to this in a slightly more watching it on my home theater setup in a slightly more, shall we say, stable state of mind, it didn't quite hit the same way.
I can believe that. I will say the production on this is just redonkulously good. Like genuinely some of the coolest space depiction of space travel that I've ever seen on screen.
This is kind of why I wanted to pick it, just because, having the equivalent of what Woman in the Moon was 90 years earlier, just the absolute bleeding edge of how you can depict outer space and space travel. I don't think it has yet been matched. I think it was shot, incidentally, by Hoyt van Hoytema, the DP for Christopher Nolan's Interstellar 5 years earlier. And that's really kind of an interesting sort of shared lineage, because this is kind of the anti-Interstellar in a lot of ways. Where that film was very romantic, where it was very, it had this very idealistic notion of spaceflight as being, we have to look to the stars. We can't just look down in the dirt. The truth is out there, and that's where our destiny is as the human race. Ad Astra is basically saying, no, just the opposite of that, essentially. We can't be obsessed with space to the exclusion of our heritage here on Earth. We can't abandon connection to the place of our birth. And that's kind of the film's thesis statement. And
Right.
As you say, Brian, it is quite like you can arrive at that finale with just a couple of sentences. It's quite easy to get to.
Right. So I was thinking of Interstellar as well, and you're right that that one has a fantastic element, like very science fiction, in that it's the not too distant future ostensibly, but they've got it's the title of the film. You can travel between stars suddenly, even though, like, at any speed we can conceive of, it would take like 50,000 years to do that. But they have wormholes, and in the end there's time travel, and like it gets very out there. But this stays pretty grounded. And I found I really liked the time period that this film is set, because it's like 100 years in the future, and the advances that are made seem realistic. Like we have like a lot of bases on the moon, and we have a couple like rustic outposts on Mars. And it just seemed like I could comprehend that was where we would actually be by that point, unlike we talked Mickey 17 recently, and that is supposed to be 25 years in the future, and they've got a colony on some planet we've never heard of before.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, specifically when this is set is, I will quote the title card at the beginning of the film: "The near future, a time of both hope and conflict." So my question for you is, what time in humanity is not a time of both hope and conflict? That feels like a sentence that doesn't actually say anything.
Yeah. That's going to be a recurring theme with a lot of the sentences that are spoken in this movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, not the first time I thought that. It's like, people are kind of stating platitudes. Like every once in a while, there would be a line that would like resonate with me, and it would kind of reset the dial a bit. But there were definitely some on the nose things, and also some like vague. Did that actually mean anything?
Yeah, but I agree with you, Brian, about the presentation of the future. Like it has what I think of as a very sort of unlabored naturalism to the sort of futurism it's putting on display. Like just the sort of details of how space flight is presented as this almost mundane quotidian thing that characters just do. I think there's an early scene where we see Brad Pitt getting strapped into this rocket that's going to take him to the moon, and it's essentially like going through an airport terminal, but more so is how they treat it. He just gets strapped into his acceleration couch, and I don't know, I think they're giving up packs of peanuts or something.
Yeah, this was my favorite part, this trip to the moon, which is, like you said, an airport. And yeah, but there's little like inserts that tell you this is not quite the world you're living in, but it's like little differences, because the pack of peanuts costs $125.
Yeah, exactly that. So something I wanted to bring up about this movie, and just to sort of like trace a line back from this to Woman in the Moon, is just the way that attitudes to how space travel is being conducted have changed over the course of the decades and even centuries at this point. Because way back in like the 19th, early 20th century, it was treated like it was the domain of, exceptional industrialists. It was sort of great men, sort of pioneers of captains of industry and so forth, who would essentially build one of these things in their garage. And it was this sort of private field trip they were taking to sort of satisfy their own curiosity and their own ambitions within society. I think that sort of changed a lot towards the middle of the 20th century, when we actually get to the space race era and the competition between the Soviets and the Americans. And you get space flight being these kind of big civic infrastructure projects, Apollo 11 and Soyuz capsules and the ISS. These are all, massive collaborations that take place at a governmental level, not that of private citizens. And what I find interesting about Ad Astra is it kind of depicts a future where that's kind of shifted back in the other direction, where now it is, we see the space on the moon, and it's all these sort of corporate logos, like there's a Starbucks, there's a Cinnabon, there's essentially like these malls on the moon.
I loved the moon food court. This was the best thing in the movie. I want to go to the moon food court.
That had me thinking a little bit of Mickey 17, actually.
Yeah.
Because it's like once you leave space, it's like kind of unregulated. But yeah, it's like all of a sudden corporations and churches and political parties can start taking over the effort. It's not like kind of a humanistic, we're all in this together effort, which is how I think of space. Like Apollo 13, it's like the literally a title card at the end, like we must fund space as a society and work together on it. It's kind of stopped being this utopian vision. It's become more this kind of free-for-all between, private and corporate interests again. And I know I said we'd get back to him eventually. Like it's kind of unavoidable when talking about the reality of space travel in the 20th century, in the 21st century. But Elon Musk and SpaceX and this weird pipe dream of setting up a colony on Mars, because we're sort of back engineering the future based on sci-fi movies we saw growing up. And it feels like Ad Astra is expressing a lot of sort of disenchantment and disillusionment with that whole like retro-engineered futurism.
Yeah, the flight attendant on the moon plane says pretty nonchalantly, "Oh, and just a reminder, passengers, the war is currently an active war zone." And it's like, well, that's not the vibe that I got from this flight up to this point. But he gets out on the surface of the moon, and yeah, there's like this gang war going on between Blue Origin and SpaceX. And somebody drives up and commits a drive-by shooting in a moon buggy.
Yeah, so it's not just that you're taking a flight, it's that you're taking a flight into Mogadishu, more or less.
A couple of things. One thing I just want to say, so we haven't quite dived into the movie, and we can talk about the plot a little bit, but texturally, the presentation of this, so I think it's the fact that, like, the way that the sound mixing and the sound engineering on this is really fascinating. It's kind of got like a almost ASMR effect. Like, it's kind of muffled a little bit too. I watched this spread out over 4 nights, guys, 4 nights, because this movie kept putting me to sleep. It had a soporific effect on me. I would turn it on and I would immediately start feeling sleepy while I was watching it. This almost never happens to me. I'd never fall asleep watching movies. It took me 4 tries to get all the way through this movie. Now, normally when people say, oh, that movie put me to sleep, that is like negative, like boring, you know, or like dull. But genuinely, like, I can admire something that like presents itself in such a way that like it does something to my neurons that makes me like want to fall asleep. I don't quite know how to describe it. I talked about this when we watched As I Was Moving Ahead. Occasionally I saw brief glimpses of beauty, Brian, how something about the way that he like mixed the sound in with the scattershot film in there also made me want to fall asleep whenever I wanted to watch it. And whatever it is about this movie, like I said, it made me like just kind of drift off. And I think that has to do with like the combined texture of the visuals and the sort of like muted sonic experience of the space travel.
Yeah. 2 things about that. Well, maybe 3. I think As I Was Moving Ahead is the furthest apart Dan and I have ever been on a film. Our ratings at the end of the episode, it was like 1 and 7.
I think I remember that, yeah.
But, so I watched this one on a Plex server, and like underneath the video, there are little reviews that aren't necessarily from critics. They could be from rando internet users. But one of the first ones that drifted by when I started the movie was hard to pay attention to. And I was wondering if that was actually going to be the case. And I don't know if that's quite how I felt about it, but one of the top reviews on Letterboxd is James Gray makes great boring movies.
Oh, I think I did see that one, and yeah, I get that. I do get that what they're going for. Yeah, it does have that kind of dreamy, soporific quality to it. Another name I'd want to bring up, because you mentioned the sound editing, Dan, which has this. It has. I don't think realistic is the word for it. It has the quality I guess you might associate with being in a vacuum. You know, we have this we have this chase across the lunar surface at one point where, you know, they're going through a war zone, and there are all these gunshots going off and cars crashing, and it's like Fury Road on the moon essentially, but it's all presented with such muted sound design, and it's almost the sort of sense you would have if this was all happening in a vacuum. It's getting at that sort of impressionistically. And that's
definitely part of it.
Yeah, and that's a word I'm probably going to keep coming back to, is impressionistic. Another thing is that the composer for this, I only realized this on this rewatch, but it's Max Richter, who is, if you remember Arrival, he's the guy who did the track On the Nature of Daylight, which I think got quoted by a lot of films for a while. He's very minimalist, very melancholy, sort of just almost ambient string sections, and it's a real vibe of a movie, I would have to say.
This movie has vibes, that's for sure. It's like I think impressionistic is a good descriptor of the overall sensation of this film. And I think you're absolutely right that like this was intentionally done, and on both a production and presentation perspective, like this is what it would sound like being in space when there's no air to carry sound waves, but also like emotionally, it kind of reflects the journey that he's going on. That whole sort of dreamy design. And honestly, there's a lot of stuff in this, in like the narrative, that's kind of dreamy. It's like, did that actually happen? That's like sort of an almost real thing that does not quite feel real that just happened. Like, including the shootout on the moon. It's like, why are there space buggies shooting at each other all of a sudden?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, like it's contextualized, but not really. There's
Right.
Yeah, it's like it's just sort of something that happens and we move past it.
The biggest one of that is the monkey.
Oh, the baboon attack. I was going to ask how you felt about that scene.
Yeah.
That
So
was a wild thing just to come out of nowhere when you were sitting in that IMAX theater in Vancouver.
especially if you're like, if your mind is in an altered state, I can imagine.
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell? But what was I going to say? Just to kind of set the ground level on the narrative for this. So this happens. So basically, this movie opens with Brad Pitt and the world around them experiencing these energy surges, which we come to learn are somehow triggered or refracted or something through Neptune, where there's a base set up. And Brad Pitt's dad is a like Neil Armstrong type pioneer of space travel. So I think he was like in charge of the mission that went out to Neptune, but he's like one of the most famous scientists in the world. So there's a lot of daddy issues going on in this movie. Like, am I good enough to be my dad? Did my dad really love me? What world did my dad make for me? And how do I reckon with that? And by the way, basically what I just said gets said aloud by Brad Pitt, or I guess in his narration, rather than actually aloud. This is not a movie that beats around the bush. It is very, as Brian said, on the nose. And that's what I was going to say is a minute ago, I was like, what was I going to say? Is in the wake of the baboon attack, which we'll get to it. I mean, we will get to it, but it has no bearing on what actually happens in the movie. But basically, when that's done, he's like, that baboon had wild energy, kind of like me, which also reflects the rage that my dad felt as I was growing up. And I was like, oh, cool. So I guess we're just stating metaphors now, like showing the metaphors and then explaining them to the audience, you know?
The interior monologue in this movie is fucking dreadful. It's so bad.
It's a slog, and it's, again, I think if you were maybe on the right wavelength, like parts of it would be very profound, like a stating of an emotional truth, like, whoa! But like most of it is just, here's a theme of the story stated in very, very perfunctory detail.
Yeah, it almost makes me think of the original narration for Blade Runner when Harrison Ford was essentially trying to sabotage the theatrical cut. It's like you could genuinely strip out Brad Pitt's inner monologue and you would genuinely, I think it would unilaterally improve the experience.
Oh, that would be interesting. Like an edit that just didn't have, and like let you figure out what was going on.
Just do
that's fascinating.
Straight up Garfield without Garfield.
Oh, I love Garfield minus Garfield, but I was also thinking I've seen edited clips of the Wonder Years that take out the narration. So it's just Fred Savage staring into space for minutes at a time.
It's pretty funny. And through a somewhat convoluted setup, we learn that things are not as they seem in this Neptune base. Basically, the theory that the government has now is that he's gone kind of mad and he might have killed the other people who were on this base, this project near Neptune. And their plan is, all right, we're going to have Brad Pitt's character record a message to send to the dad. I guess the idea being that like the dad will, if he hears his son's voice, he will metaphorically come back to Earth. His sanity will be restored and he will stop shooting out the energy flares. I still never really understood why a base in Neptune could be causing like solar system wide energy flares.
Yeah, how could you shoot a gamma ray? How could like a person shoot a gamma ray burst? I didn't really understand that either. I was trying to think what this whole structure reminded me of, and while we've been sitting here, I finally just got it. It's Apocalypse Now, and Heart of Darkness.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the Heart of Darkness narrative model. I had that note.
Which in that story, so the original novel, it's the guy who has gone crazy, has ventured off into the jungles of Africa. I don't know if he's in the Congo or something like that, but in the movie Apocalypse Now, they set it in the Vietnam War. So like this colonel went off and like into this jungle village in Vietnam and just cut loose from civilization and like made himself a god king. And then the story is, okay, protagonist, you have to go in and kill him because he's crazy and he's dangerous.
Yeah, I think it maps pretty precisely onto Heart of Darkness and to Apocalypse Now. And, that's a model that's been used by a few different genre movies. I think another one from right around the same time that did this was Annihilation, which is actually a pretty similar setup. But this is the first time I've seen it done in this sort of space odyssey model. And the gist behind why Brad Pitt's father, who's played by Tommy Lee Jones, did we say that?
We did not. No.
Yeah. So,
and I thought it would have been interesting if they didn't show him until, well, we'll get to it, but until we actually see him in person, because we see up front like, oh, I know who that here's a file picture and it's Tommy Lee Jones from Men in Black. Yeah.
So he's out there around the rings of Neptune, which is apparently a good vantage point to get to get footage of exoplanets. And Tommy Lee Jones, we gather from the sort of messages he sent home, is obsessed with finding intelligent life on other planets, and he's essentially extricated himself from all of society, and he's made himself the god king of this space station. And these antimatter pulses, which is pretty pseudoscience, you're right, this doesn't make a ton of sense, but are a kind of artifact of power drain he's using to take these images of far different planets and other solar systems. And this is what Brad Pitt is charged to stop.
Gotcha. Yeah, the dad really wants to find aliens. He like this whole product. What was the name of the ship that he's on? It's like Project Lima or something.
Yeah, the Lima Project.
Is like an outgrowth of the modern SETI program, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Yeah, exactly that. So, so as we say, it's essentially this kind of iterative outward journey over the course of the movie where Brad Pitt, he stops off first at the moon, eventually gets to Mars, and subsequently hijacks his way onto a spaceship heading for Neptune.
And so the sequence here, by the way, I also like, it's not just geographic, but it's also like societal. He's going further out.
Yeah.
So like the moon we kind of talked about is kind of corporate, and that's like kind of mainstream. The Mars is where there's a military base, but it's like a well-established military base. It's like, if you've ever actually been to a military base, there's like society going on there. But then when they're going to head out to Neptune, that's like the fringes. And so the thought is basically, yeah, so first of all, they bring him to Mars to do this kind of communication thing with the dad. But this whole thing is real goofy. First of all, if you're just going to like send out a video recording of him, why does he need to fly to the military base to do that?
I agree.
Doesn't make any... that was the first thing that my wife said. I watched it with her. And she was like, why does he need to go there if they're just like recording him and sending out a message? But obviously it's kind of operating in dream logic world. And then they like get him there and he sends out one message and then they're like, all right, read this script. I'm like, okay, why do you want him if it's just reading a script? Okay, whatever, read the script. So then he doesn't read the script. He like speaks from the heart. And then they have a thing where they speak off, like you can't hear what the other people are saying, but they speak off screen. They're like, all right, this mission's done. You can go now. We're not doing this anymore. I was like, why did you want the sun? Why did you even care about this? Like if you didn't want any of this, it just felt kind of odd the whole time.
It does a bit, yeah. I think I got the impression watching this that it was taking a lot of cues from Blade Runner 2049. The Mars base in particular, the design of it with these sort of acoustic panels in sort of alternating patterns, obviously like the sort of rust red. He walks through this sort of underground corridor and there's like a stray dog just wandering the corridors. And it's much less interested in justifying why he's there in the first place than the sort of progressive sense of isolation, and the sort of dreamlike quality of that.
Yeah, because part of this also is he runs the risk of becoming his father. If you didn't get that,
yes,
but you probably got that.
Which, if you watch the movie, you will know, because he announces that that's one of the things that he's afraid of, is becoming disconnected like his father was from him. And so the whole communication, like, let's try to talk the dad down with a message from the son, that doesn't work. So now their thing is they're going to send a spaceship to Neptune that has a nuke on it, and they're going to use that to blow up the base, the Project Lima base, so that they can't send any more of these energy blasts to Earth that mess things up. And this is where Brad Pitt stows away. So he like sneaks onto the rocket ship that's about to escape or about to launch to.
And he just accidentally kills everyone.
Right. That was kind of because he didn't try to kill everyone, but they all try to kill him. But like one after another, they accidentally die. So which gives us the image of him being stuck by himself, off to face his daddy for real. But like he does it for like 3 months. He's stuck in this spaceship. He shuts down all the comm systems. So he's just like staring at a mirror and writing journals and stuff.
And the thing that we're established about Brad Pitt's character, Roy McBride, is that he's very he's very internal. Like he doesn't he's very stoic. He doesn't have very many stimuli. He doesn't really respond to stimulus. Like he's able to fall from near Earth orbit down to the ground in this sort of emergency situation that opens the film, and his heart rate never rises above 80. But as he gets closer and closer to Neptune, he's doing these sort of medical check-ins and status updates about the state of his mental health. And he's getting progressively more afraid. Like his heart rate is starting to rise to levels that it's never typically done before. And, there's this sense that he's supposed to be unraveling. Actually, one sequence that did kind of get me emotionally was this montage while he's on the this 3-month trip completely alone, and he has this sort of sequence where he's just curled up on his cot, and you just hear him muttering to himself, "Selfish, selfish, I'm so selfish, I'm so selfish," and it kind of hits on that level of when you don't have anyone to talk to and you don't have any access to anyone outside your own head. You end up in these sort of spiraling thought patterns, which I thought that was impressionistic in a good way, in a way that I thought was quite effective.
Yeah, I know I've been kind of like making fun of a lot of stuff here, but like certainly in the production, but even in like emotional moments, in little snippets, it works. And there are times when it registers. I think it is too self-serious and like explicates a little bit too much, but I definitely buy that certain moments will kind of stir you. And I think that's been part of the subjective reaction to this, is like the number of those moments might, depending on how deep you're able to get on the James Gray wavelength here, could like really make this, a sensational piece of cinema if you are able to get there, or just like a sensational production with an overinflated sense of seriousness if you're not on the wavelength, That's a good word, yeah.
Yeah, it had me thinking of some other pieces of art where I really, really like the ending we arrive at. I'm thinking of the act in the novel Cavalier and Clay that I've talked about before, where one of the characters is in Antarctica, and it's like a third of the book, but he picks up a radio broadcast from another station on the ice shelf, and he realizes, oh, that must be, because it's during World War II, oh, that must be the Nazi broadcaster, and I'm the Allied broadcaster. And so he like triangulates the signal, and he's gonna trek across Antarctica in like a little hopper plane and go and kill the Nazi who's out there. Even though like he's the only other person on Earth who understands the isolation that he, the American broadcaster, is experiencing. And so that, you know, tracks him like literally to the end of the earth to finish him off. But really, maybe they have more in common than they let on. Another one that falls a little bit into that bucket is The Train, where it's these two guys fighting to the ends of the tracks, and they finally get there. Like literally, the wheels have come off. They're both kind of gone crazy, but they've gone to these extremes, and all that's left is one has to kill the other.
A recent one around that theme of like isolation and the connection and the relating to other people who are isolated is the film The Gorge, which is an Apple Plus original, which I reviewed on thegoodsreviews.com, and I wrote about how it has a lot of similarities to the music video of You Belong With Me. But the premise is that Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy are stationed on opposite sides of a gorge within which there are dangerous secrets, and they're each representing a nation, I guess, and are like essentially protecting it, but they're like not supposed to communicate with each other, but they're like on opposite sides, so they can sort of like keep eyes on each other, and they're supposed to report back to their nation if the other side does anything unusual. So that has themes of that too, but that one is like in a very, very different context. It is interesting, like the way that you can kind of take isolation and take this notion of like being deep in your own head and how that makes you think about other people as cinema, or like really as any story.
Yeah, true enough. And it comes across differently in prose than it does in films, where so much is, you know, contingent on performance, where we like optimally we don't have access to the characters in their monologue. But one thing I wanted to touch on here is Brad Pitt himself, his performance and his casting. I don't know, guys. I how do you feel about Pitt in this movie? Because I kind of think he's wrong for the role.
Interesting.
For one thing, on the one hand, like he's 55 when this was made, and like this is going to sound mean to phrase it this way, but the fact that the story is so much about his relationship with his father and like his daddy issues, I think it sort of projects the, you know, this guy who doesn't necessarily look much younger than Pitt is. He kind of comes across as a bit pathetic in a way that I don't think the film necessarily intends. Like, he's supposed to be kind of a melancholy, lonely figure, but there is sort of a sense of, dude, like, get your shit together. You know, is this really the most meaningful, like most definitive relationship you've had? Like, if this was written for somebody 25 years younger, I would probably buy it more. And I think it's not helped by just how generally affectless he is in the part where so the narration is doing so much of the heavy lifting.
I thought that too. I was doing math in my head trying to figure out how old Tommy Lee Jones was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I think what this movie demonstrates is that, like, to the surprise of no one, Pitt is sufficiently screen present and like interior as an actor that he can play a character that in a movie that has this much riding on his shoulders of like just face acting and stuff. But he definitely makes the choice, as you said, to make him stoic and affectless. So like, I don't know. I think it would be very interesting to see this movie with someone who's younger, someone who's a little bit more expressive, and like, how would that color your perception? And maybe it would seem a little bit less silly to me if like it's someone who you would more expect to be like hot-headed, and someone who like you would kind of further by that, oh, he has this training that he's supposed to be cool-headed, but like really under the surface, he's just a big kid, you know, who wants his daddy. Because you're right, he's too old for that to happen here.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned, like, in this episode already, both First Man and Blade Runner 2049. I kept thinking of Ryan Gosling was who I kept coming back to. I think he could, I could kind of see this done with him, and it might be a bit of a different experience, maybe a little bit more vivid.
Yeah, and I just because I said his name, but kind of on in my mind, like someone who's a little bit neurotic, like Miles Teller. I don't know if he would have been the right person, but like someone kind of that ilk, where they've kind of got like an intensity, like an inherent emotional intensity, would have been a very interesting alternate take on this.
Another one of the top Letterboxd reviews is along the lines of Brad Astra is sad Astra about his dad Astra who's gone mad Astra.
Some wordplay there.
Wish I could take credit for that.
The way that this story kind of wraps up is Brad Pitt does indeed get to the base on Neptune, and indeed his dad is the only one there. He has to do like this maneuver where he takes like a little rover type thing, like a mini ship, off of the main big ship, but he brings this nuke with him. His nuke fits in a backpack, and he's going to set it off and blow up the base, but he also wants to save his dad. So he tries to convince his dad to go along. But the dad, something I should say, I probably should have said this earlier, another important part of Brad Pitt's character is that he got divorced by, what's her name?
Liv Tyler.
Liv Tyler, that's right.
Who also played an astronaut's girlfriend in Armageddon.
Oh, there you go. And so that's like his secondary main character trait is he's sad about his wife leaving him. The first character trait, he's sad about his dad. The second thing is he's sad that his wife left him. So that's kind of an undercurrent, is like he wants to go, is like, does he want to go and try and rebuild that relationship and reconnect to Earth? And as Brian said, yes is going to be the answer. Like, don't go crazy like your dad. Connect with people on Earth. And so he does try to convince his dad, Tommy Lee Jones, to come back, but basically it's kind of back and forth. At first he's like, no, and then he's like, yes. And then they go out there, and then Tommy Lee Jones is like, no, I'm going to stay here on Neptune. And doesn't he like launch himself back to Neptune or something? Or to the base? I can't remember.
It sort of launches himself into the guts of the planet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now Brad Pitt has to go back home without his dad. But he did fulfill the mission, which, by the way, wasn't even his mission. Like, he sabotaged, like he hopped on the ship, and this is what the other people were going to do. But he has fulfilled that mission of blowing up the base, because when the nuke goes off, it launches the ship. I was a little questioning on the physics of this one, too.
Yeah, it seemed dangerous.
Like, I don't think you can ride a nuke to go back to Earth.
You actually can. Oddly enough, this is a genuine engineering proposal. I've watched a couple of PBS Spacetime episodes about this. Actual hypothesis. So looks implausible. Apparently, not so much.
Wow. Well, there you go.
Yeah, 100%. So that's Ad Astra.
Yeah, and then we see at the end he has reconnected with Liv Tyler. We see like a sort of flash forward of him getting coffee with her or something like that.
Yeah, they make kissy eyes at each other from other sides of a cafe.
So there we go. Brian or Andrew, any other thoughts on these two films? Very interesting connective threads. We have some like going to space to deal with the fact that you feel conflicted about the world and to process that. And also because you're sad about a girl who left you. And also, I don't know, a lot of connective tissue, particularly when you consider the generational gaps. But I thought it was an interesting pairing. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's just an interesting sort of parenthetical around the history of the way that spaceflight's been depicted, about how, you know, effects are used to sort of realize these things to like this high degree of photorealism. And also just the kind of thematic resonances that space has had and continues to have throughout time. An interesting thing I think about Ad Astra is it kind of comes at the end of what I think of as the NASA core wave of the 2010s. we had like Gravity, we had Interstellar, we had The Martian, we even had stuff like, I don't know, Passengers, Alien Covenant, where space travel was being depicted in very like photorealistic detail for a while. And I think that's kind of taken a back seat in sci-fi genre films since then. And I do wonder if there's something there about, since 2020, people are maybe less keen on the idea of being contained in a sterilized, claustrophobic environment as a means of escapism. So I don't know, just a shower thought there.
Oh, interesting. Well, I on that thought, you absolutely should see First Man.
Oh, I need to.
Without spoiling it. It's kind of built on the backbone of 3 separate missions or like training exercises or whatever. And the third one, the last one, of course, is Apollo 11 itself. But it's kind of the build up to that. And the first 2 are shot much more subjectively and I would say impressionistically. And that kind of builds to the third one being shot more epically and like, I guess, photorealistically, but like kind of capturing it less from here's just what a person would see and feel to like, here is the actual scope of what is happening. And it's like, I wish I could have seen it in IMAX, honestly.
Interesting. Yeah, I need to make time for it. For sure.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about what is the motivator for space travel. Right. Like, people will say, oh, why do we spend that money? And then other people will say, oh, it's this noble pursuit. But, like, think about what has motivated advancements in space travel. Like, the Cold War, it very much grew out of these missile programs. And it's a missile flex. It's like, if you can do things in space, it's really just showing that you could bring a missile down on any part of the Earth. Or the other side is, maybe you could make money from it. Maybe there is gold out there. Or an asteroid made of diamond or something.
Yeah, I think that's all very true. And there are these entirely mercenary and entirely cynical motives for wanting to do these kind of technological advancements. But I do feel like there is kind of a more humanistic, more sort of spiritual significance that almost emerges from it as a byproduct. And that's maybe a little corny, but it's something I've never been able to let go of ever since I was wee. And that's why I keep coming back to movies like this.
Well, I think also, I mean, another factor of it that I think kind of connects the 2 things that you're talking about is that space travel, not in its current form, but in like a couple generations from now, may be the thing that keeps the human race alive. Like, we are kind of destroying our planet. Not a big surprise there. Or I feel like that's less controversial than it used to be. And like, we're overpopulating it and we're destroying the climate and the ecosystems and stuff. And like, it's kind of, if we want to imagine a lifespan for humans that goes millions of years, it's hard to imagine that actually succeeding without space travel. So like, in some ways, these crude first steps to space are paving the path for the eternity of humanity, Yeah,
creating a precedent, I guess you might say. And I think, like, I know centrism is kind of gauche, because I think both Interstellar and Ad Astra kind of have a point in each other's favor. Like, on the one hand, no, we shouldn't be neglecting, policies at home in favor of chasing this pipe dream of a colony on Mars. But also, yeah, like, if there is a destiny for humanity, if we don't destroy ourselves, I think, as Carl Sagan said, we may one day venture to the stars. We kind of have to. It's almost kind of like that. That's the way the arrow points.
Yeah. I wanted to take the opportunity to read the plaque that the astronauts placed on the moon, which says, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969. We came in peace for all mankind."
Well, that's pretty good.
So when they went, that's what they put there. So there is at least that ideal.
100%.
On that note, I think I'll talk us into, is it good? Is it good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. So I guess I'll go first. Why not? We'll start with Woman in the Moon, 1929. Is it good? As with movies that are kind of dated from like this old, I tend to feel like they don't. It's in some ways I admire them for what they were more than I actually like them. And I think this one has the backbreaking flaw of it's just too damn long and it's not paced in a proper way. That said, I still ended up feeling fondly for it, like even not grading on a curve, just because it ends well. And like even the long path to get there, there's lots of really cool imagery and moments and acting, great direction and composition. Just like kind of a feast of interesting silent cinema going on that's just not properly narratively structured into like a really interesting story. I mean, it kind of is, but it's just really slow and it drags out the opening. So I'm going to give this one a good and probably slightly on the higher end of good. That's a 5 out of 8 for me. And that I think it's kind of one, it's not, there's not a perfect, easy number to put on it because it's got big strengths and big weaknesses. But what about you, Brian?
I'm going to say essentially the same thing, but land on a different number. I did find it slow, especially that first 55 minutes. But the visuals of all the moon stuff are really, really cool. And what an interesting historical note that, like, these are the people who had the ideas that would get put into practice. Like, this is basically the very same rocket scientists who would get co-opted by the Americans in a couple decades. But it's slow. It's quite slow. The whole thing is slow. It's too long. I was watching and thinking of ways to edit it down and make it more compelling. I'm going to give it a 4, a good-ish, because those moon visuals are pretty unforgettable. I just wish we got to them quicker. Where are you at, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right there with you, Brian. I think we talk about films in terms of having historical interest, and a lot of the time that's kind of used as a pejorative. But in this case, I think the historical interest is really interesting, and that is kind of reason enough to seek it out. Having said that, yeah, the first hour is really lugubrious, and I don't think it's to any particular benefit. The visuals, once we get to the rocket launch and to the moon landing, are really striking, and they put into sort of historical context a lot of the way people thought about space and astronomy at the time that I find really fascinating. I also feel like it leaves a bad taste in my mouth because of its association with the Nazis and the development of rockets that would be used to drop bombs on my grandparents. But I'm still prepared. It's in the public domain. You don't have to pay for it. So with that in mind, I'm going to land on a solid 4, just on the higher end, just verging into a 5.
That brings us to Ad Astra. And I'll go first once again. This is a 2019 film by James Gray. I'm going to also give this one a good. Another one where I think you could really make a case for a wide range of numbers. The critic who I enjoy, he's divisive in circles that I follow, but his name is David Ehrlich or Ehrlich. I actually don't know how you pronounce it because I don't think I've ever heard him in like an interview or anything. He's the chief critic at IndieWire, and he's a very influential critic these days. And he makes a top 25 movies, just absolutely terrifically edited countdown at the end of each year. And I watched the 2019 one, suspecting Ad Astra might be on there. And indeed, he had it as his number 3 movie of the year. So like, I think there's a case, if you find the right wavelength, that you could really, really love this. I also think there's a case that you could just be bored to tears or like almost to laughter at how on the nose it is. I'm going to give it a good because I'm kind of in the middle of those two. I was bowled over by the production and I found moments of it that worked. And like, I don't know, I thought it kind of came together at the end as like being emotional. It's kind of almost in half. It's like you have this first half where he's more in society and the second half where he's kind of on his emotional journey. And like ostensibly I should have liked that second half less because it's more of just him navel gazing and talking about his daddy feelings, but honestly, I felt like it built in a satisfying way too. So I'm good, like verging into 6. I probably have this a little bit above the Woman in the Moon, but I was fond of both of them in relatively equal measure. So I'm going to give this a higher end 5 for Ad Astra. That, depending on my if I'm not going to fall asleep 4 times watching this movie, it might end up going a little bit higher than that. But I don't know. What about you, Brian?
So, like you, I probably liked them about a similar amount between the two movies, but I was just kind of underwhelmed by this one, which I don't know if that's deserved, because the visuals in this one also awesome, but I feel like, you know, we've gotten better at that over the decades. Like it's more of a bonus in something from the 20s to have convincing space effects. I did quite like the realistic depiction of a not too distant future. Like it really seemed like we could have this amount of technological advance in this amount of time. But the story, I don't know, it didn't grab me in the sense that it's just the idea that isolation is bad, and look how isolated you could get, and do you want to do that with your life, Brad Pitt? It felt thin. It felt scraped over too much narrative bread. I'm going to give it a high 3. And it's mostly because of how much I want to go to the subway on the moon. But it's close to a 4. I'm mostly doing that just to differentiate that I think I liked the Woman in the Moon a little bit more.
Okay.
What about you, Andrew?
So for my part, I'm actually more aligned with Dan on this one. I am a very vibes receptive viewer. And on the one hand, yeah, Ad Astra has great design and it has great visuals, but I think it also has more than that. I think it has quite a coherent visual schema that feels atmospheric and expressive, and just a kind of a world that I like to just immerse myself in. To be a little bit crass about it, like watching it sober, it did kind of make me think this is a great movie to watch stoned. I think that, Brian, you're right. The story is kind of thin. It's a bit underconceived. It's not as smart as it tries to pass itself off as being. I'm kind of prepared to overlook that, especially in any of the scenes where nobody is talking. Doubly so when the monologue is absent. So I'm going to give this a solid 5. It's good, and it's one I want to revisit, even if I don't think it's a classic.
You know what it really is for me is I wanted there to be aliens at the end.
Oh, I was wondering if there was going to be.
I thought maybe, but that would kind of be against the whole point. Like, that was not what they wanted you to go away with, and I get that. But they kind of built up that, like, that's why the old guy was out there, and maybe, and then no. Just conclusively no.
It definitely teased it, yeah. But that is interesting, so. But this is awesome, Andrew. Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation and these movies. And Brian, can you quickly tell us, what are we going to be watching next week?
Yeah, so I think what I'm going to go with is I'd like to watch the 1967 musical Dr. Dolittle.
Oh.
Now, I know this is one that Dan knows some of the meta context of. It'll give him an opportunity to talk about a film history book that he likes. I don't know, because I'll still be in the thick of production this week, if I'll have time for anything beyond that, and it's a long movie anyway. But if you want to go ahead and watch other Dr. Dolittles, I'm not going to stop you.
That's a bit of a
Eddie Murphy or RDJ.
Yeah, that's right. We'll see how I'm feeling. So this should be fun. Andrew, thank you. Listeners, come to thegoodsfilmpodcast.com. Join our Discord. You can reach out to us, tell us what you think. You can make recommendations for movies for us to watch. And Andrew, do you want to pitch anything, a website or something for people to go find your stuff?
Sure, I have my fingers in a few different pies these days. I suppose at the moment what I'd like to point people towards is thegoodsreviews.com, where I've been writing up reviews of the TV series Gangs of London with Dan's help and his editing. But we're just coming to the end of that as of this recording, and I'm really proud of that project. So please go give that a look if British crime TV sounds like a good departure from space movies for a while. But yeah, thanks so much for having me today, guys. This was a blast. It gave me an opportunity to dig into stuff I really geek out about. So this was a great time.
Cool.
Good talking to you.
See you next week, Brian, and thank you, listeners. Bye.